Hello, this is video 3 in the Garden Star Sampler Quilt tutorial. And in the first one, we talked about how to organize your materials. So we have all our materials here nicely organized and labeled in our baggies, ready to go. We've already completed block 1 in video 2. So block 1 was the New England Star block, and we completed that in video 2. So you can see mine here. Now we're going to be completing the next block, which is the Sawtooth Star block, and that's this one. Now, this one is made up of 4 flying geese units and then our squares that we've already cut. So we're going to be putting together these flying geese units. And let me give you a couple of tips on these. You can see here that I've already prepped my flying geese units for this block. And I'm going to put one together for you. Our first step into the flying geese units, let me point this down a little bit so you can see better what I'm doing. Okay, so my first step is going to be drawing a diagonal line across the back side of my squares here. Then I'm going to place one right sides together, and I'm going to stitch on that line that I've drawn there. That is our stitch line. When we were doing half square triangles, that diagonal line was our cut line. But when we're doing flying geese, that is our stitch line. Now I can either use my rotary cutter and a ruler, or I can use my scissors. And I'm going to trim that seam allowance to 1/4 inch, or about 1/4 of an inch. Then I'm going to press that outward, and I can either finger press or I can give it a quick press with the iron. In this case, I'm just going to do a quick finger press here. Then I'm going to take my second square and I'm going to lay it right sides together and stitch again on that diagonal line that I've drawn. And once again, I'm going to trim my seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch. Then I'm going to flip it open. And I have my flying geese unit. I'm going to give these a quick press, and then I will square them up. To square up flying geese units, you're going to want to place them so that you can trim along 2 of the sides. And then you'll turn it and you'll trim along the other 2 sides. Now, a couple of hints with flying geese units. Sometimes if I read my pattern ahead of time and I see that I'm going to be making flying geese units, I will cut the pieces for those flying geese units a little bigger than what the pattern tells me. And that allows me to have a little more wiggle room with my units in trimming them down. So I'd rather make them a little bit bigger and trim them down. The other thing you can do if you're going to be making a lot of flying geese units is that you can look at whatever size your pattern is telling you that you're going to need to have. And instead of doing them one at a time like what we just did, you can do a 2 at a time method. Now, doing the 2 at a time method does require that you cut your fabric to different sizes, and there are some rulers and things that help you with that 2 at a time. There's some charts that you can find online that tell you what size to cut those fabrics to. But for our purposes for this particular quilt, we're going to be following the directions from Sherry McConnell that are in your pattern. And that's just doing those diagonal lines and assembling those flying geese just like the way we just did. All right, so I'm gonna go press all of these, and after I do that, I'm gonna start assembling my rows, and this block is gonna come together really quickly. Okay, I've pressed all my pieces. Now I'm ready to start putting my 3 rows together. And the way I'm gonna do that, I'm just gonna place them right sides together, and I'm gonna use a 1/4 inch seam. Now, I prefer, I'm just gonna give a little tip here. This is a magnetic seam allowance guide. I prefer using this to using a 1/4 inch foot, because on a quilt like this where I'm having to do some half square triangles and flying geese, I can very easily pop this off and pop it back on, slide it into place, and use it to guide my 1/4 inch seam, as opposed to having to change from a 1/4 inch foot to a regular foot back and forth. So that's just a little tip for you there. And this foot that I'm currently using for this particular on this particular machine is just an open toe foot. It allows me to watch. I actually can watch the fabric all the way in, and I have a thread cutter on here, but it keeps cutting. Okay. So I've got that row together. I'm going to do my next row. I'm going to do each of these rows, and then I'll give it a press, and I'll be right back. Okay. All right, so now we're ready to put our rows together. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to put it right sides together. And I have pressed this so that this seam is pressing out from the center. Let me turn this down a little. So this seam is pressing out from the center, this top one and the bottom one are both pressing out, and the middle row is pressing in toward the center. So here it's pressing in toward the center, here it's pressing out, here, just like that. Okay, and that's going to allow me to nest these seams so that my corners come together really nicely. Now I'm going to give you a hint that's helpful. It was helpful in our last step as well. When you are sewing these flying geese units to the next piece, have your flying geese unit facing up. That way you can just check and make sure that you're not cutting off your point there. So that way it's facing up, and I'm going to be able to watch it and make sure that I'm not cutting off my point in my flying geese unit. Take my pins out. And do the bottom row now. I really like the Sawtooth star. I actually made a quilt once with, I don't remember how many Sawtooth stars that it had in it, but it was a memories quilt for a friend of mine with cancer. And for that center square, I actually sent out 5-inch squares to friends and family, and they decorated the squares and sent them back to me. And then I used them in the center of the Sawtooth squares for that quilt. And it came out really beautiful, and he took it with him when he would go for chemo, when he was in the hospital. And even at the end in hospice, he had the quilt there with him. So it was, this particular block always reminds me of him. Of me making that memories quilt. Okay. All right, I've got all 3 of my rows together. And all that's left to do is to press this block. So I'm going to give it a quick press, then I will square it up just like I squared up the previous one. And I'm going to end up with a beautiful sawtooth square just like that. Okay, so that was the second block. We have 4 more blocks to go. So far we have this sawtooth star and we have the New England star. In our next video, we're going to be doing the patchwork sawtooth star block. So our next video is the patchwork sawtooth star block. So make sure you join me for that one.